Hello, people of the internet. So today, I thought I might show off the way that I edit my photos in case anyone else wanted to give that a shot. Now, if you don't really want to sit through this whole video, or you just want an easy way to do it, or you're just lazy, which is fine, I've actually made a LUT. I'm lazy too. I sometimes use the LUT, but I made a LUT that kind of does all the color work of this process. $1 to $2. I'll put a link in the description. Note that if you do use the LUT, you won't have as much space to play around in the editing process because most of the color work will already be done. But if you just want it quick, or you want it on video or something like that, there you go. That's your simple answer. Disclaimer, I do use Capture One, which is not a free piece of software, but a lot of what I am going to do can be recreated in a certain way in free pieces of software like GIMP. And I actually used to edit in GIMP, and it was, for the most part, perfectly fine. I mean, it's just not necessarily as powerful or focused as something like Capture One might be, or Lightroom. And I don't use Lightroom, and I'll get to why I don't use Lightroom in a bit. So I thought first off, I would show off some of the kinds of photos that you might expect. I do a lot of really intense cyan chemical sort of blues for the skies and very warm shadows. I want to say it's a film look, but this is a bit more exaggerated than actual film would ever look. It's a bit more of a stylized look. It's something that I really enjoy. Another important aspect of my photography is having very straight and defined lines. I don't do landscape photography. I don't really, I think it's great. I love looking at it, but I'm personally not very good at it because just a lot of what I do is heavily based off of angles, and I also don't really think of composition a whole lot when I'm taking the photo. I see a composition roughly, and I just snap a quick photo, and then I bring it to 100% in editing, which again, I know some people don't like. If you can make the photo, make it how you want. It doesn't really matter how you get there. If you like what you end up with, that's fine. Or at least that's how I feel about it. Another important aspect is I don't really have any integrity for the original photo. I'm going to do what I do to it. But you don't have to be like that. You know, you could always kind of apply some of these concepts and still kind of maintain a certain level of integrity. It's really up to you. I just want to share some of this knowledge. First step is sliding in your SD card. And usually if you have RAW files on it, Capture One will automatically bring up this little window to import your RAWs, but sometimes it doesn't do that. So Windows is sometimes a little dumb. Also, I don't know if I'm using the most recent version of Capture One. It might be a little outdated. I haven't really cared to check. So I'm going to pull in some photos that I took a couple days ago. I took one that I particularly liked that I have right here, I believe. Pro tip, in your Capture One import window, you can double click on images to zoom. I didn't actually know of this. I didn't know about this for a while. Yeah, you can do that. So I'm going to import this one. So I think I'll also do this one too. This is a somewhat of a soft image, but I think it'll work all right. All right, so once you got the images that you want to work on, you can... Wait, why does it say 12? So once you got the images that you want to work on, you just click the little import button and they start importing. So I'm going to start off with this image. Step number 1 of all of my images is to get them as straight as I want them to be. And like I was showing earlier, I am very intense about having really straight parallel angles. I usually try to get them parallel with the frame, and Capture One has this awesome thing called Keystone, which is not unique to Capture One, by the way. The other pieces of software have this, but you basically just line it up to the straight edges that you want to be lined up, and there's nothing else in this frame, so I'm just going to kind of point it generally where it looks like it might be straight. Actually, I might be able to base it off this. This is a bad idea, but I'm going to try it anyway. So I'm going to line it up with some straight objects in this image, and I'll hit apply, and it has adjusted everything. I do want this tree in here, so I'm going to go into cropping and adjust a bit. Now, this will create some wild distortions in your image. Personally, I think they're kind of cool, but I guess not everyone thinks that. If that's not for you, you don't need to do this step. If you don't like this crazy distortion stuff, then that's fine. That's just kind of how I go about it. Here's our image after our correction. It's still a little wonky, but I think it's fine. I do have a preset that I made. Kind of gets me most of the way there automatically, but I'm not going to use that this time because well, obviously I'm showing you guys how I do these things. So after I've done my perspective correction, which is more like image distortion, I always go straight into my color editor, into the blue, which is going to be the sky. The sky is usually this darker blue, and I turn it towards cyan, and then I bump up the saturation just a bit. Because if you go crazy, it can get kind of baked looking. So I try to be kind of minimal, quote unquote. I'm doing drastic changes. This is not minimal, and I kind of like how that looks. I might bring the lightness down a bit and the saturation up because I kind of like the darker skies. It just kind of creates this dreamy sort of unrealistic tones that I like. And then I would usually go into color balance, take my shadows and make them a bit orange. Now there's not a whole lot of shadow in this image, so it's not super visible where it is getting applied, but like in spots like this, you see this tree turned orange. That might be a little too orange actually. I'll turn that back a bit. That's kind of the general idea. And that's like 90% of my look, right? Is just those adjustments. And as you can see, this already gets pretty close to the some of the reference material that I was showing off here. It's starting to get this look. It's not completely there. Maybe we'll bump up the saturation of the entire image up just a smidge. And usually you have to be careful with HDR because it can make everything look kind of weird and unnatural, but I usually turn the highlights down a bit and the shadows up a bit because I'm kind of going for like a faux film look, and film has great dynamic range, and HDR can fake your way there. Again, you do have to be careful with it. Sometimes I'll add a bit of clarity. I don't usually like how clarity looks. I add very little of it. I tend not to add anything like vignetting because I feel like the whole point of the way I take photos is just the shapes, and when you add vignetting, it kind of confuses everything. This is about most of the way there. Maybe I'll pull my white balance towards orange and then pull my sky a bit further away from that. I've never made a video like this before. I'm sorry if this is not up to whatever standard has been set for these kinds of videos, because I've just never done this before. Anyways, after I've done all that, I also add a crap load of grain that is just basically sacrilegious to people that actually shoot on film. I do actually have experience shooting on film, by the way. I stopped doing it because of price reasons and because I am a little impatient brat that couldn't wait for my film to get developed. I do add a bunch of film grain, and I usually, in Capture One, use the silver rich film, turn up the granularity a bit because I like how it kind of gets a little soft. The other thing, all the lenses I shoot with are vintage lenses, and they are not sharp at all. They're very much not sharp. Some of them, one of them is literally this little plastic lens that came off of a disposable camera you were supposed to use for insurance reasons if you got in an accident on the side of the road. I cut it out and I drilled a hole in the lens cap and I hot glued it on, and I use that sometimes. So I don't really care about sharpness, but if you do, maybe you don't want to turn up the granularity so much. Noise reduction, I hate how it looks. I always turn it off. I usually leave color noise reduction on because color noise does not look good in my opinion. The other stuff, I always turn it off. Other than that, this is basically it. I mean, I've kind of gotten to the look. Now, these are a little more orange, I'm noticing. I like how this image looks now, but if I were to try to encapsulate those a little more, maybe I'd move my white balance a bit more. I'm going to call this image as finished as I am willing to get it, so I'm going to leave it here. On to the next image. So I felt like this one would be rather interesting, not because it's a great image. I don't hate this image. I don't love it either. But the thing is, we do have this square right here, which means instead of just doing vertical corrections for perspective, I can do the full square of corrections, which is something that I always prefer because, like I said, I like having these really straight lines. Now, I don't think you should let anyone tell you how your photos are supposed to look, how you're supposed to edit your stuff. Like I said, your photos are what you want them to be. I don't really think it matters how you got there. It just matters how they look finally and whether you're happy with that. Unless you are doing it professionally, if you're like a wedding photographer, obviously in that case, you have to make the photos look like the way your client wants them to look, or if you're just doing any sort of professional photography. But I do this for fun, and I don't think I will ever do this for money because my photos aren't particularly marketable. But regardless, that's kind of my philosophy. You don't have to agree with me. That's just how I look at it, and I thought I might share that because that might explain why my photos look the way they do. So there we go. That's pretty corrected. There is a bit of lens distortion, but I'm not going to bother with that. The first thing I'm noticing is it is green. So this is just regular photo editing stuff. Let's pull back on the green a bit. And actually, I can probably just... yeah, that's better. All right, so now that we have this image, I'm going to start going into my color editor and doing the same thing with the sky. I always pull it towards cyan and this case, it's very desaturated, so I'll definitely boost it a little more. Now, I feel like this is a good time to mention one of the reasons why I don't use Lightroom. One of the really important reasons why I don't use Lightroom. I don't know what's wrong with it, but it's like on straight lines like this, it will always create these sort of orange and blue fringing things that just look god awful. I'll see if I can find an example, but they look really, really bad, and I've never had this issue with Capture One. Like, I've only noticed it with Lightroom and the mobile version of Lightroom 2, like photos on my phone have that same issue. It just totally wrecks photos. It's fine from a distance, but then you go and look and you're like, what are those weird little orange and blue stripe things? It doesn't look good. I also don't use it because I think Adobe is just kind of scummy and has treated me very poorly in the past. So I just stay away from their products. I try to go open source if I can, but like I said, Capture One is just a much better workflow for me than GIMP was. So I'm sticking with that for now. Back to photo editing. So I've pulled my sky towards cyan and made it a bit more saturated, maybe a bit too much, but we'll leave it like that for now and then check on it later. So now I'm going to go into my color balance, and for the shadows, add some orange like I was doing before. And see, now it starts getting that look that my photos tend to have. You got to be careful, because if you go too much, it starts looking like a Breaking Bad Mexico cutscene. If that's what you're going for, go ahead. That's kind of sick, but not what I'm going for in this case. So now that we have a bit of orange in the shadows, I'm going to go ahead and maybe pull my exposure up a bit, bring the saturation of the image up a bit. Oh, that's not a good tone. I'll have to tweak that. Pull the highlights down and the shadows up. I'm starting to really like how that looks. Now I'm going to go into my color editor again, but this time I'm going to go into advanced, and see, this lets you choose a specific color. In this case, I'm going to choose this color, and it just looks kind of icky. Push the hue towards the reds, remove some saturation from it, I guess. Maybe I'll turn down the lightness just for like the sake of the composition. And this image looks a little baked right now, so maybe I'll go into my, yeah, that's nice. Now that that looks that way, I'll go into film grain and add a crap load of film grain. Yeah, so the other thing that I'm sure you'll notice is that these aren't looking exactly the same. That's partially because I would usually spend a lot more time on this. I'm kind of skimming over, taking the more important components of the process just so I can kind of get it all out at once. If I were to actually go through my entire editing process, it would be super boring, and it would probably be like 2 hours long. Though admittedly, sometimes it's a lot shorter than that because I just use my preset, which I've also made a LUT out of. Wink wink, you can go get the LUT for like $1 if all of this is too daunting for you, which is totally okay, because like I said, sometimes I just use the LUT. And I think this is a pretty okay image. It's still a bit green for my liking, but if I keep adjusting it, I'm just going to be adjusting it till the end of time. Probably going to stick with that. Let me turn noise reduction off here really quick. Also, one more thing. Like I said, I use vintage lenses. They have horrible chromatic aberration, but it looks kind of cool in my opinion, so I just leave it. Yeah, it kind of looks like a indie game. Someone just discovered screen space shaders and just decided to put a crap load of chromatic aberration on it. No. But yeah, I think I'd call that a final product. If anyone wants to see more of this, go ahead and let me know. And if you don't, then don't let me know, because I'll probably do it anyway, and you can just not watch it. I hope everyone has a lovely day, and I'll see you guys. Well, I might not. This might be my only video ever. I don't know yet. All right. See ya.